we are waiting on Wayne, Mark, and
Nope, I'm here.
Right?
Mark is here. Yep.
I got a new iPad and I just didn't label it.
Yeah, and I actually just got word from Dennis and from Antonio that they both should be joining us, but that they might be running a few minutes late due to other meetings. So, oh, there's Antonio. Great, he's with us as well. So I think we're going to get going then in the interest of time, and hopefully Dennis or Wayne are able to join us later. So first of all, thank you all for being here this morning. And thank you especially to our guests, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But real quick, the first item on our agenda, well, we have our roll call. I think we've got everybody here except for Dennis Smith and Wayne Primo. And then we need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Great. All right. Moved by Stephanie, second by Mark. All in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, all abstaining. So that passes unanimously. And so that brings us to public comment. Do we have anybody for public comment, Sean?
No, we do not.
Great. All right. So with that, we were moving on to new business. We just need a motion to approve the minutes from our November 10th meeting.
So moved.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Support.
We have a support from Bob. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, all abstaining. So that also passes unanimously. So now we can move on to our second new business item, our presentations from Dan Paralek and Shannon Morgan. We'll begin with Dan this morning. Just by way of brief introduction, Dan is the founder and president of Opticos Design, which is a renowned California-based design firm. He's a leading international expert on housing, urban planning, and design, especially is an expert on zoning and form-based codes. Literally wrote the book on form-based codes, so we can answer a lot of those nitty-gritty questions you may have for him later. And he coined the term missing middle housing, which we've spent the last 2 or 3 meetings talking about to a greater or lesser extent. So really don't think we could have a more perfect guest at today's meeting. Really appreciate you taking time to talk to us, Dan. And with that, happy to give the floor to you here. And we'll have questions for Dan at the end of his presentation.
Great. Thanks, Evan. Thanks for having me. And thanks to Shannon for inviting me as well today. I've known Shannon for a number of years now, and I'm just always happy to participate in a robust and important conversation about missing middle housing. It's something I'm obviously very passionate about. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So I'm going to take probably about 15 minutes, and I just wanted to plant some seeds. I know you've been talking about missing middle housing for quite some time. Hopefully I'll provide some additional insight and maybe some additional questions in your minds. But, part of the reason that I became so passionate about these types, and in particular about 11 years ago, I wrote an article for a Smart Growth Compendium, where it was the first time that I identified missing middle housing and created the diagram that now seems to be everywhere, that I'm going to show you in just a little bit. But I think the reason that I'm so passionate about this missing middle housing concept is that there's a tremendous gap between the type of housing that many households across the country need, as well as the type of housing that many households actually want. And missing middle housing is a really great tool to help cities and communities across the country to help fill this gap, and also a tool for builders and developers as well. And what's ironic about this, and what this image represents, is that in the early 1900s, you could actually pick up a Sears and Roebuck catalog, and purchase a duplex, a fourplex, an eightplex, and have it delivered to your curb in a box, right? So you could assemble it on your site. And we've obviously come a very long way in the wrong direction since those times. And to be quite honest, I think it really started with zoning. Most of these housing types were built before zoning was put in place in the sort of mid to late 20s and into the 30s. And so a lot of our work is about sort of removing those barriers. But the little duplex on the upper left here, I actually grew up in a small Midwestern town, Columbus, Nebraska, about 20,000 people. And my great grandmother actually lived in a duplex almost exactly like that one in the upper left, probably about a 500, maybe a 600 square foot 1-bedroom unit. And the great thing is that it was, everything she needed in that home, partly because it was a block and a half from the main street, which sort of had many of the services and amenities that she needed to get by. And so, one of the points that I like to make, and sounds like you're sort of grappling a little bit with your zoning, is that the current zoning system, sort of density-based zoning system and use-based zoning system, is really an out-of-date operating system. It's just over 100 years old and has not had a major rethink. And I sort of often ask the questions, can you think of any other 100-year-old operating system in place today that we use daily that hasn't sort of overgone a major overhaul? And I can't think of very many. It's like trying to use this camera, which is from the early 1900s, to post an Instagram photo or even just email a photograph to your best friend. It's like we're just using the wrong system to try to deliver community and to deliver housing choices. And I think the great, I've been following what Michigan's been up to for quite some time. A colleague of mine, Jim Tischler, who works for the state of Michigan, he was a fellow board member at the Form-Based Code Institute. But I know that the state has done a bunch of these target market analyses. And I think I remember seeing that you had done some of these already for Marquette. And so, right, this is a really great starting point. You've identified sort of the need and specifically by building type. And so that's a really great place to be starting. So what is missing middle? This is the diagram that I referred to earlier. Right on the left-hand side of this diagram in white are single-family detached houses. And I think we would all agree we have sufficient planning in place, zoning in place. We have developers who know how to deliver these housing types. We've done a great job of that over the course of the last 60, 70 years. On the far right-hand side is the bigger development. It's 3, 4, 5+ stories. Sometimes it's mixed use. The more conventional garden apartment I typically put into that classification, where in particular the infill work is like most cities and the development community have figured out sort of how to deliver that upper end over the course of the last 15 to 20 years in particular, or sometimes in the last 10 for smaller places like Marquette. I'm not sure how much infill is happening at that scale, but it's all these types in the middle. It's the duplex, it's a fourplex, it's a bungalow court or cottage court, it's a mansion apartment that really existed in every neighborhood prior to the 1940s that we've stopped building. And so it's middle in terms of the scale. It's a house scale, and it's also middle in terms of its ability to deliver affordable price points to households, in particular at the sort of median income, sort of about a 60% median income. Typically, sometimes it's a little bit higher or lower. And a really important concept here that I say, if you're going to take away one concept from my entire presentation here, it's that missing middle housing is house scale. It just happens to have multiple units inside that house scale building. And this is just a really great example of a triplex recently built. This is in the Salt Lake City region in Utah. Right, you would walk by this, drive by this, ride your bike by this, and never really even notice that it wasn't a single family home unless you stop to look more closely at it. So really important concept. And I think one of the other important part of my message is that, right, we need to start communicating about and thinking about planning and zoning and just delivery of housing in a much different way. And I highly encourage cities to just stop using the concept of density because it scares people. It's not really an effective way to talk about housing choices. And so I say, let's step back. really learn and understand this broad range of housing types that are inherent in this missing middle concept and start communicating directly about, hey, I think a cottage court and a townhouse and a fourplex would be fantastic in this neighborhood, or hey, this neighborhood's a little bit different, so maybe we can introduce a fourplex and a sixplex as well. And so I just highly encourage, in terms of effective communication and a dialogue, to like shift away from multifamily and density and these other terms that we often use, and really talk about the types directly. And I think the community members, they often and very regularly respond much more effectively to that conversation, right? Right, this is one of my favorite missing middle types in the fourplex. It's a really basic type. It's 2 units on the ground floor and then 2 units stacked above on the top floor. And I often call this particular type the Rosetta Stone of missing middle. I tell cities, if you can figure out how to remove barriers in your zoning and the right places to deliver these types, and you can find local builders to deliver them, it'll go a really long way in alleviating sort of this need for this broad range of choices and sort of middle price points in your community. And it only took me about 5 minutes to find a missing middle housing type in Marquette on Google Street View. So I know you have them. This was a great little, I guess it's a, no, I see 4 mailboxes. It's actually a fourplex on Arch Street. So you have them, you can point to these and talk about them, because there are great local examples in your community. I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what cities are doing to apply this concept pretty quickly, and then also what developers are doing across the country. And I highly encourage cities, like the low-hanging fruit in a lot of instances are the downtown adjacent neighborhoods and sort of the transitions from your Main Street area into the communities. Once again, as I can say this as a planner, as an architect, that we've done a bad job over the last 50 to 60 years of trying to plan for those transitions. In a lot of instances, they're parking lots, they're drive-through businesses that really don't belong in the downtown. They sort of crept into the neighborhood. So I just encourage to look really closely at the downtown. And I've started calling these the missing edges, because they're sort of a piece of a city that are a great opportunity for a variety of different influence, and in a lot of instances, missing middle as well. Cities across the country are leading pilot projects. This is a great example in Decatur, Georgia. I'm hoping by now it's actually constructed. I haven't followed up, but it's a case study that I included in the book, a small cottage court that the city's delivering to city employees that are at 80 to 100% median income. Really great case study. And then, zoning is a really important part of removing barriers, rethinking your zoning, stepping back. Sometimes it can be something as targeted as taking an existing zoning district and modifying some of the metrics, the setbacks, the parking standards, the densities, the heights, to enable missing middle. In other instances, you can create new zoning districts. Some cities are doing plans for downtowns or neighborhoods and throwing out their zoning codes, but there's a lot of different ways to apply this. And what I say is that the most effective way to do this, this is just an example of a form-based zoning district that we used in the city of Cincinnati. We've done it in bigger cities. We've done it in small cities like the island of Kauai. Right now, we're doing some really small hamlets, integrating missing middle housing through form-based zoning. And the concept here is just embed the range of types that you want to allow directly into those zoning district standards. Don't say, we have a certain density or we have a certain floor area ratio and we're hoping to get missing middle. Just be really upfront and ask for what you want. A lot of our work over the past 5 to 6 years has been working with cities to directly identify the barriers for missing middle in their citywide plans and smaller area plans than within their zoning, and also policy. And we call this a missing middle scan and deep dive. And really it's about working to identify, this is in Greenville, South Carolina, where we actually did both the county and the city at the same time. And this was partially funded by a real estate group that sort of had identified this issue and wanted to promote missing middle in the county and the city. And so these maps just simply show the analysis work we did to identify sort of a hierarchy of places where the city and the county should allow these missing middle types. And then we do this graphic analysis of the zoning that shows, sort of starting on the left, the zoning's allowed building envelope in the gray, In the middle is what the zoning actually will likely deliver. And in a lot of instances in these medium density zoning districts, they mostly encourage large single family homes in a lot of instances just because of parking requirements, which make it really impossible to do anything but one or sometimes even 2 units. And then the right hand side just simply shows, okay, well, we want to do a fourplex on that typical 55-foot wide lot. What will it take? We reverse engineer the zoning to enable those types in that design solution hypothetical build out. And then, some cities like the city of South Bend, Indiana, who we worked with, are using missing middle housing to encourage reinvestment and revitalization of distressed neighborhoods. In this near northwest neighborhood in South Bend, you couldn't actually, about 40% of the lots were vacant, and sort of every year, 10 or 15 lots had houses torn down. You couldn't buy a house and renovate it and not be underwater. So there was subsidies were necessary to encourage investment or even new construction. So the city decided to utilize missing middle housing. And so we did this plan for the neighborhood. We worked with a group that ran pro forma analysis, and it showed that a cottage court, a triplex with an accessory dwelling unit, and a fourplex actually could be built new and pencil out for small local builders. And so the city changed their zoning, and so there will be incremental infill in this community over the course of 10, 15, probably even up to 25 years to fill those gaps back in. And a couple of private sector case studies. In terms of rental housing, we've utilized missing middle housing to really rethink what it means to sort of develop or design a multifamily project, and we've designed the country's first complete missing middle neighborhood, which is being built in the Omaha, Nebraska metro. Right now, it's 40 acres. It's going to be a little over 600 units. And the concept here was providing a range of the missing middle types, starting at a duplex and triplex and going up to an eightplex. And you can see the concept designs down along the bottom. So you get a variety of forms, a variety of types that really make a neighborhood as opposed to just an apartment project. These were just the different parts of the neighborhood that were envisioned. There's now 132 units built. The project is hugely successful for our client. It's sort of delivering a broad range of price points for renters. It's even incubated a few small businesses in these little Main Street buildings that you're seeing that have it's a live work building with a townhouse over a ground floor flex space. And there's now a pizza shop, a yoga studio, and a coffee shop about to move in. So it's delivering on that walkability as well. So it's a really interesting project. And this is a sixplex, looks like a bigger house. Each unit has its own entry. People are, in particular, downsizing baby boomers have been super attractive, in particular to the ground floor units. But there's a real broad series of demographics for the households that are renting in this community. So I just want to mention in terms of for sale, we were approached by a large builder in the Salt Lake City region, and they had an issue where they historically had built mostly single family homes. They knew that the market was wanting something different. They had started building some townhouses, but they couldn't actually build a townhouse and sell it at a price point that an entry-level buyer could afford because of increase in costs of materials, land, labor, entitlement. And so they said, well, can missing middle help us hit a price point, still be good design? They said, we still want good design. That's part of our brand, part of our identity, but deliver a good design missing middle housing type that can meet a price point that a townhouse couldn't. And so we designed these Muse housing types for them that were able to sell at a price point of about $25,000 less than a conventional townhouse. And you can see they deliver really high quality living. It's a double-story living space, really good shared community spaces. A lot of these sold to single person households, in particular women, single households that were led by women, both young, sort of young professional women as well as baby boomers. So just a really interesting case study that was able to achieve sort of attainability or affordability just by simply using thoughtful design. This has won a handful of awards, including a CNU Charter Award, got an award, a Gold Nugget Award from the Pacific Coast Builders. And so now it's being recognized. So one last example here is this cottage court example, which is a case study in my book. It's done by a colleague of mine called Union Studio. And I think, this is a type that really resonates a lot with a lot of different people. It's just a series of small sub 1,000 or just right at 1,000 square foot. Some are detached cottages, some are attached cottages in a triplex format. And this is in a site that's just very close, very walkable to downtown in Greenwich, Rhode Island, and just a really fantastic example of a cottage court application in an infill context in a small town. I just want to mention that just at the extreme end of things, car-free living is actually in high demand in all different parts of the country. We're actually working on the country's first what will be the largest car-free community in the United States in Tempe, Arizona. And if you think of Tempe and Phoenix, it's sort of a place that's historically been identified by its dependence on the car and a pattern that's been sort of planned around the car. And here, starting next year, this car-free community will come out of the ground, and there's been so much demand. There's actually more people that have put deposits down for the first phase than there are units, and there's 3,000 people signed up for a waiting list. So it's about providing choices in housing, choices in lifestyles. A couple of concluding thoughts here. In 2016, because there was such high demand for information about this, we launched missingmiddlehousing.com. So it's a really great free online resource if you want to find out more. And I just challenge people, this is a great quote from Urban Land Institute magazine, that it's time to rethink and evolve and reinvent and renew. And I think I'm glad that you as a city are really stepping up and sort of thinking very critically about what it's going to take to deliver these housing choices. I say whether you're a planner, a decision maker, an architect, a developer, a real estate agent, a community member, like each of us will play a role in that, in sort of delivering these housing choices. And we all need to really step up and think outside the box to deliver them. Just want to mention that Evan mentioned my book on missing middle housing, titled Thinking Big and Building Small to Respond to Today's Housing Crisis. So it was released by Island Press in June of this year. If you use my last name, you get a 20% discount. It's Parolik. So it's done really well. It actually was selected as Planetizen's one of the top 10 planning books of 2020. So I'm super excited that it's gotten such a great response, and I look forward to our conversation.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate that. And I think we got a copy of your book on missing middle housing that's sort of slowly circulating through the committee. I read it. I think it was really great. I know Antonio's read it, and Bob's got his own copy. I gave mine to Stephanie after. Awesome. So anyway, really appreciate you putting the work into that as well, because like I said, I think about half of us have read it at this point, and it's definitely very helpful and will be a great resource for us as we're putting together our reports and our recommendations to the City Commission. So with that, I just wanted to open up, if anybody has any questions for Mr. Parolik, if we have anything anybody wants to ask, now is the time. I think we are actually running ahead of schedule. So,
Dan, I've got a quick question for you. How do we change people's minds and make them go away from the McMansion idea? Because that's very prevalent up here.
I would say, I think an important message is this isn't about forcing anybody to live in a certain way. It's simply about providing choices for the percentage of households that want to live in that don't want a big single family detached house, or maybe they're downsizing, or maybe they're at a point in their life where they have different needs. And so I think it is really important that this isn't about forcing anybody to do any particular, to get rid of their car, or to live in a small unit. It's really about there is this gap that I mentioned at the beginning in terms of, like, if I were to go on to like a web, an application or website like a Trulia or Redfin, which is a real estate site, and sort of see what type of housing is for sale in Marquette, I would imagine, for example, that 30% of all households in city are single person households. And I can guarantee that right? 30% of the housing in Marquette are not designed and built specific to the needs of a single person household. And so really it's about filling those gaps and it's, so I think that's an important part of it is like, you know, let's provide choices. We're not forcing anybody to do anything they don't want to do. It's simply about, hey, if somebody wants a different choice, like let's provide it, because we've done a really bad job of it the past 30, 40 years in particular of delivering those choices.
Dan, have you found that these developments have to be incentivized to get community support in governmentally?
Financially, is that what you're asking, or?
Yeah.
I would say it varies. The economics vary from city to city. Like in the hotter markets where we do a lot of work, right? It's the developers don't need incentive. In smaller markets like a Marquette or other parts in the Midwest, we're doing work in Iowa City, Iowa, for example, Des Moines. So like those in a lot of South Bend, Indiana, a lot of instances, the cities do need to provide incentives and fill some gaps to make the projects pencil out. And the other thing that's important, like the case study that I mentioned in Decatur, I really highly encourage cities to lead the development of case studies, because it provides the comps in the market that gives local builders right, it reduces the risk, and it also gives makes it easier for them to get conventional financing, because the bank can point to that comp in the market and say, yeah, look, it's been done, it's either renting or selling. And so of course it makes sense to do more of that and to finance more of that. So it's good in a couple of different ways. A lot of times to sort of reduce that risk and just prove that there is a market for it, and others there's a need for sort of gap, filling some sort of a gap, whether it be in some sort of a tax abatement or some sort of tax break, or sometimes cities providing infrastructure. There's a lot of different ways cities can do that.
I have a question. I think a lot of what you talked about was new development, and a thing that we've kind of discussed a little bit in our group here is there's just not a lot of empty space in Marquette to build new buildings. So I guess what would you recommend as far as retroactively going into neighborhoods and trying to kind of fit these types of housing into already existing buildings?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. A couple of different strategies. I think a really good strategy is to start with accessory dwelling units, allowing them by right in your zoning. And a lot of times it takes not actually requiring an additional off-street parking space to make them viable on those small, especially the smaller lots that exist like in downtown adjacent neighborhoods. Those might be tiny houses. You could allow a couple of tiny houses on the back of a lot. One of the case studies in my book is a conversion of a single family, sort of a historic single family home into a fourplex. It's really hard to make the economics of a project like that work, but it is something to think about. And you have to be really thoughtful about it in terms of where you want to allow that to happen, because historically we've done that in some places where it's compromised the integrity of the neighborhoods. So it has to be thoughtful, but I think those are a good starting point. But I would imagine even in a place like Marquette that doesn't have a ton of infill opportunities, I think you could find enough opportunity to sort of fill some gaps. And like those downtown edges might be a really good place to start, is like, let's start looking at those transitions and where there might have been some gaps where buildings were torn down or buildings were never built. And or maybe there's bigger lots that have one home on it that it might make sense to allow a second home to be built on.
And this might be something that we want to communicate with the people who are buying the vacant lots surrounding the hospital. That was trying to remember how many of those lots have just sold. And I think those areas could be really good for some infill, like you're talking about. And it's just a matter of getting in touch with the people who are buying them and saying, look, there's other options.
Yeah, I think that's totally correct, Stephanie. And I think that, I mean, I was just talking to a small time developer in Marquette the other day who wanted to buy one of those lots and build like a triplex or a fourplex, and was kind of prohibited from doing so by the current zoning code. So I think that it's kind of getting back to kicking the tires on the code, as Dan is saying, but absolutely, that's an opportunity. Does anybody else have any other questions here?
I guess I have a question for you, Dan. I do a lot of development, and we find that a lot of people want to be on first floor only. We have some 3- and 4-story buildings. It's harder to rent the higher floors. Anything that you have done to make that more appealing or better? I mean, I know we have elevators, but it's just what the elderly grouping wants.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's what we found in our Prairie Queen neighborhood in Nebraska, which is the latest missing middle project, is that the majority of baby boomers, especially those that are downsizing, want that ground floor unit. And they actually want a larger unit than what we had initially expected, because they might be downsizing from a 3,500 or 2,800 square foot home, but they still want a 1,500 square foot apartment. What's great about the missing middle is like in the Nebraska project, is all the units have their own individual entry, which I think really helps. So you're not walking down a shared corridor or walking up a shared stairway. You sort of enter a door and you have your own private sort of entry into your upper floor unit as well, which makes it live more like a single family home and makes it more attractive, even those upper units. So, I think inevitably those higher units are probably going to go for a slightly lower rent point, just because of, not everybody wants it. But, with the missing middle, I think it seems to make it equally, if not more attractive to the non-baby boomer households. Just because once you get up there, with the missing middle types, you also typically have windows on 2 or 3 sides, a lot of times 3 sides of a unit. And so it's nice to be up above the street level. And so, yeah, I think there's no magic solution, but I think missing middle does, in some small ways, address and make those upper units more attractive to renters or buyers.
Okay.
And what I would say is, I think it was Jackie that asked about how to encourage the development of missing middle where there's not a lot of opportunity for vacant lots. And what I would say is, when we do the missing middle scan process with communities, a lot of times it's really eye-opening how much opportunity there actually is in those communities. And we're just very thoughtful about where to prioritize the application. And so that's just always a good process to go through as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a few very large homes that are owner occupied, just single family, and if sometime down the line, if they ever get sold, you could possibly transition them into multifamily units, but I just don't know how you would incentivize that.
And I think that's what Mark was talking about one day, or one meeting, just how hard that is because of fire suppression and bringing them up to current codes.
Yeah, there's 3 units is a threshold. If you get over 3 units, you jump from a residential building code to a commercial building code, which adds additional requirements. So there's like a sweet spot in the 3 units. Unfortunately, I'd love for it to include the 4 units before you jump up. So there are added costs once you jump up to the 4 units in particular to have to meet the commercial building code. So yeah, there are challenges. It's not a simple task, but folks are trying to navigate it and figuring it out.
I'm just so excited to see in your slide and slides that Evan has shared with us before, the different types of homes. I've had clients say, well, where are your row homes? Where are your townhouses? And we just have them at the real high end. We don't have them at the missing middle.
Yeah, it's I often tell the story about my in-laws who, at the point where they were retiring about 10 years ago, they had kids sprinkled across the country. They could have they had sort of moved around the country. So there wasn't one place that was really home. So they could have lived anywhere. And so they looked in about 8 different markets for a non-single family housing choice in a walkable context, and they just had a really, really hard time finding anything. Like a lot of instances, the realtors would like take them to a brand new house in a suburban subdivision. They're like, this is not what we want. And then they would take them to an apartment in a, fairly conventional garden apartment complex. They're like, this isn't really what we're looking for either. There's not, I can't walk to anything. And I think that's really the case everywhere, is just, providing that diversity of choices is really important, and it is missing. And I think a lot of cities are having this conversation at all different scales. And it's really interesting. I gave a ARP. This is such an important topic for the aging population, that ARP have become really big proponents of missing middle, and they've hired us, and we've been doing consulting over the course of the last 3 years for them to educate their membership about the benefits of missing middle housing, but also the benefits of walkability in communities. And so it's part of their, what they call the livability index, which is a really good tool if you haven't looked at it.
I've got one more real quick question just about that community that is the no car community, which is a really interesting idea. I assume it's located really close to some sort of public transportation that you can walk to that could then take you out into wherever you need to go, or is it like kind of a self-contained place with shops and all that?
It does have a mix of uses. It'll have a small market. It'll have a co-working space, a coffee shop, a handful of restaurants. But it is located along a light rail. It's next to a light rail station, but it's also, I often call it car free, but mobility rich, because they're going to have, Uber and Lyft stations sort of sprinkled throughout the perimeter. They're going to have bike share, scooter share. They're going to have a digital concierge where, like, if you're renting in this community, you can, log on to the app and have your groceries delivered, or your restaurant delivery done, sort of taken care of. So it's just a really interesting way to think about how many mobility choices are available at your fingertips these days, and can provide, not everybody needs to be car free, but just like, every once in a while, you don't want to get in your car, or some people don't want to own a car, and they would rather just find different ways to get around. So it's a pretty interesting concept, and we're super excited there. What's even more exciting is the project is, it's 20 acres, which isn't huge, but the next project for them is going to be like 150 acres, and they ultimately want to do a car-free city. And I think they have the means to actually do it within the next 10 years. So it's going to be exciting to see. Have a question for you all. From what I'm remembering, have you done some form-based coding already in Marquette? I think I seem to remember seeing.
Yes, this is Dennis. I'm the community development director. So we have actually 3 different form districts in the Marquette. We have a downtown waterfront code, a South Marquette code, and then we have 3rd Street corridor. The 3rd Street corridor is actually a transect, which is more of the modern one, and then the downtown waterfront, the other one, were done by Jeff Farrell, Barry Madden. Why that's been like 15, 16 years ago, I think. And that one is not a transect style. I think we're kind of working through which ones we like a little bit better. I've come to like the transect style because you can kind of apply it in other places and keep your consistency, but it worked really well for us.
Yeah, that's great to hear. That's a really thoughtful comment. I think we often, in majority of our form-based coding, will use some version of the transect because for various reasons, but like we do, when we write a new set of zoning districts, we want it not only to apply to the planning area for that particular project, but we want the cities to be able to like take that zoning district and find other places in the city that it could effectively regulate an intended result. So I'm really glad to hear that. And in Iowa City, for example, they had a downtown transition code done probably about 10 years ago, and they had one for a greenfield development. And part of our process there was focusing on a new growth area, but they wanted us to consolidate those through the two codes and our new code into one system to make it easier to administer. And I know Jeff Farrell's a good friend of mine. I actually administered one of his codes about 18 years ago for a transit station here in the Bay Area. So I know your waterfront code would probably look very familiar. I would imagine he has a very specific technique. So
He does, yeah.
That. Where are you guys at in sort of discussing like where and how to apply missing middle? It sounds like you've been talking about it for a little while.
From perspective of my office, we have been talking about this for probably about 2 years. We've put this into our community master plan as one of our goals. Some of the strategies that we've implemented is when we updated our land development code, we do allow accessory dwelling units. However, when we put it in there, there was a little bit of fear from the community, so they were done as a special land use. We are now going through an amendment to allow those as a use by right with conditions. And that's being worked through the planning commission level right now and will be presented to the city council or city commission in January, hopefully for adoption. And we are also working at some possibilities with the next group of speakers from Renovair Development on some potential options as well. So it's been on our radar for some time, and we're kind of working through the pieces of it now. And perhaps Commissioner Bonsall could give a little commission perspective on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. I can, I can quickly summarize a little bit. So, I mean, just for some context for our guests here, this committee was created by the Marquette City Commission back in January of this year to explore, some possibilities and some issues in the community around housing affordability and housing choice. And so we're going to be presenting a report to the City Commission in January and then another one in June of this coming year. And I'm chairing the committee because I was the City Commission's representative. And I know that, housing affordability has been a huge topic of discussion in our City Commission elections in Marquette the last 2 or 3 years. There's a lot of city commissioners who are really interested in it. And we really have just, I think, started scratching the surface. Dennis and his staff have been working on it for a year or two now. But our committee has really just started scratching the surface in terms of what might be possible and just really kind of trying to have some brainstorming sessions the last couple of meetings. But I'm really excited about the direction it's going. And I'm also glad that we're able to kind of walk and chew gum at the same time here a little bit, where we're talking about these concepts and at the same time, Dennis and his staff are able to start applying some of them with the changes, for example, to our ADU regulations. So that's sort of where we're at on a broader scale.
And we have a lot of unique challenges that, well, maybe they're not so unique to our community, but one of the things we're working through is how much can be too much on a lot. We have a lot of sub 50-foot lots, these 50 by 125s, or sometimes they're 43 feet by 120 feet. And, trying to massage what the appropriate setback versus a zero lot line as infill in a neighborhood. Those are kind of like the challenges that we're looking at. So while we have these committee doing these broad concepts and stuff, we're kind of intercepting their thoughts and starting to, at the technical end, massage some of these details in a way that, like I like to say, in the community development world here on the ground, if you can make everyone moderately unhappy, then you've made some type of agreement that's going to work for the community.
Yeah, that's great. I just noticed your Iowa sweatshirt. So
awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate, Dan, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today. I understand that, you're a little limited on time, and we also want to make sure we get to Shannon here. So, but I really appreciate you taking time to present to us today, and for taking an interest in Marquette. So thanks once again. And, I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say this is a really helpful and informative conversation for us.
Great. Good luck in your conversations. And I'm probably going to stick around a little bit to listen to Shannon before I have to jump off. But you all have a great day, and good luck in your missing middle efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. It was an honor to have you speak.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Great. Well, I think moving on to the second presentation we have here. So we're also very fortunate to have Shannon Morgan with us, and I believe also her partner, Jill Ferrari. They're both managing partners at Renovari Development, which is a Detroit-based housing development firm that's done a lot of award-winning work in both rural and urban communities, including here in Marquette. They were involved with the Grandview housing complex, I believe. And so, and Shannon's a leading statewide and national expert on housing, brownfield redevelopment, low-income housing tax credits and things like that. She was the 2018 National Affordable Housing Developer of the Year. And I think that, she'll also have, she and Jill also have some really great information for us, and we'll have another Q&A session for them at the end of their presentation. So Shannon, if you want to take it away.
Perfect. I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Jill Ferrari, who, as Dan mentioned, some feedback from, is also the co-chair of the Michigan District of the Urban Land Institute. So we're really happy to be kind of merging all of our passions together, and to bring Dan into this conversation, because I think anytime we like to talk about missing middle, we've had the opportunity to work with the best. So I think what we're going to do is just give you a little bit more feedback on who we are, some examples of work we've done that really fit this platform, and talk more about, we like to change the word affordable and focus more on what attainable housing is, the tools that we use as developers in the marketplace to kind of bring all of these principles we're talking about together. So I'm going to turn it over to Jill to get us kicked off.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I am going to share my screen, hopefully. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. Need to ask. Zoom is not my specialty. We're grateful to be here. As has been mentioned, we are a real estate development company. We focus on transformational projects throughout the state, ranging from the Upper Peninsula down to Southeast Michigan and everywhere in between. Our focus is really about creating comprehensive projects that solve community needs. We are not your typical developers. We don't focus solely on market rate. Our sites are usually really complex, as you'll see as we get into our experience. And our capital stacks for projects are usually very complicated. There are 4 managing partners in the company, and we will let you know a little bit about each one of them. But first, I'm going to let Shannon give you a little bit more about her background, particularly in the housing area, because it's very extensive. Shannon?
I have been in the development realm for about 25 years, primarily started in the home building industry, working for Michigan's largest home builders. We focused primarily at the time, we did not have, a coin of the term missing middle, but on missing middle projects in urban cores. I've completed about 20,000 units of housing throughout the country, and predominantly working here in Michigan specific, work with you name the type of projects, capital stacks, kind of density, have worked in several different initiatives that cover that, do serve on numerous committees and commissions in the state. As we continue to have the conversation about form-based code and other initiatives, I did meet Dan. I am lucky enough to serve on the National Steering Committee for Smart Growth America's development arm, which is Locus.
My background is different from Shannon's, which makes us a very complementary partnership. I'm a licensed attorney. I started in market rate development in brownfields. I've done a lot of very large brownfield projects. We're going to talk about a few of them down the road, but also worked with local governments to establish brownfield authorities, including Grand Traverse County when they established their authority for the state hospital project 20 years ago. My background is really in land assemblage and horizontal entitlement, financing, and public incentives. But I also am very active in Urban Land Institute, so I was happy to hear Dan quote them. We are very interested in building a membership in the Upper Peninsula, so we'd love to have any of you that are interested. Please let me know. The other two partners of our team have market rate housing and commercial and industrial experience, as well as property management and significant hospitality experience. So between the four of us, we have a very well-rounded background, very different perspectives, and usually allows for us to have a very robust discussion on projects, and has created a very successful partnership for the four of us. These are the types of financing programs that we have used in the past. Like I said, Shannon and I are not typically, the developers who would take a greenfield site and do, a simple single family housing project. We love a challenge. And from both a site perspective, but also from a community perspective, whether it's workforce or economic development or special populations, those are the projects that we typically are attracted to. We've used every one of these tools many times over and are constantly at the forefront of creative uses of these programs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in detail in some of the projects. So getting into the projects, I'll let Shannon start with some of her more notable projects. This does not include all of them, but they are definitely the most notable. Shannon?
And before we get into some of the more missing middle prototypes, I'll share my experience with Marquette. I'm so excited to be back here because when Jill and I got together and decided to launch our own female-led development company, my first conversation with her, the predominant amount of work that we had done together was in the city of Detroit, which we'll explain. But my first question was, how do you feel about going up and doing more development work in the Upper Peninsula? Which, by the way, when I brought the team up, everyone fell in love with Marquette. But for some time, for about a year and a half, several of my associates and friends in state agencies had been talking about, I think it was about the time that Marquette had some of the TMA work that was underway. There was some bustle on it at the state agency level. We had gone back and forth about the opportunity to bring obviously downstate developers in to look at projects. And after numerous conversations, I got a call, very interestingly enough, that someone said, listen, there's this vacant building in the city of Marquette. Have you been there? There's been multiple development projects that have been put on the table. It's a tough building. It's been on the demo list. Would you be interested in bringing your team? And at the time I was working with HRS Communities, and we actually scheduled a meeting with Barry Polson, flew up for a day, fell in love with the building, and can tell you that very quickly connected with CAM and some other agencies, the Brownfield Authority, and said, we are absolutely going to be able to move forward and kind of put together the capital stack and put this, project into the pipeline. And we can further talk about, how we had to maneuver and work through those capital stacks just to get that building kind of repurposed. But I think you guys are fairly familiar with the site, 56 units that we put in workforce housing using a 9% MSHDA tax credit. I will go on to the rest of the projects really quickly just to give you some idea of other projects we've worked on. Below that, the Gateway in Fremont, Michigan was an adaptive reuse of their former historic high school that was located on their main street. We repurposed that into a senior community. What you see here, we actually removed the center courtyard of the building. that won the Edson Tax Credit Award for Rural Housing for Best Tax Credit Project in the country. So was really excited to be involved in that. That also was a 9% with comprehensive and, you know, very, very difficult capital stack. Other projects I've worked on in the rail districts in Southeast Michigan, Eaton Street Station was a comprehensive brownfield project that we did 164 live work townhomes. What you see there were units that we went vertical, 4-story infill units with 500 square feet of commercial retail. We actually rebuilt and recreated the rail district there. That at the time in 2007, won Best Condominium Award for the National Association of Home Builders. It was just adjacent to access to Amtrak. So really started to redefine, you know, Birmingham's need for missing middle. And Mason Run, this very much reminds me, just so everyone knows, Mason Run reminds me very much of Marquette's hospital site. It was a very comprehensive brownfield site where we did a major cleanup of the former paper mill and Mason Run. This was the first new urbanism project that we've ever seen in Michigan. And we really planned a comprehensive missing middle neighborhood. We did touch upon multiple specialty populations in here, as well as targeted set-asides for affordability. 250 new homes were designed with pocket parks. A lot of different product was designed in this. We did win the 2008 Economic Development Excellence Award from Brownfield Renewal Magazine. We won the New Urbanism Award through CNU, amongst a slew of other awards, but this was a great, basically design for the community. Main Street Crossing in Birmingham was an extension of the town's actually Main Street. And what you see, this is the upper right-hand corner. That was a brand new construction. You can see that the design was very traditional. This also brought in mixed use, very, very high density units that we were able to get on this contaminated former lumber yard, also backing to rail directly behind here, and extending, you know, the downtown corridor of Brighton, Michigan into their residential district. Below the garden lofts is just one of the units, and if you guys have been to the entertainment district downtown Detroit, all of the townhomes and housing along Ford Field, Comerica Park, and Little Caesars Arena was part of the Brush Park Master Plan. Very excited that I was able to work on the original team that put that master plan together. And the Woodward walk-up townhomes are just in front of this, but this was the first green building done in Detroit, which was a 62-unit loft building just adjacent to Comerica Park. So you know, you're able to see the fireworks with every Tigers game, you know, off those balconies there. So that was a very exciting project.
So a few more slides of projects. These are projects that I've worked on in different capacities. And I specifically picked these projects because in each instance, the local unit of government was interested in participating and encouraging the project and was looking for creative ways to use the tools that were previously listed in the slide above. The Northville Psychiatric Hospital, I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's a 414-acre site. Northville Township is not a core community and has therefore had less tools in its toolbox than core communities do. And so what we did, we actually passed the property through the Wayne County Land Bank. Wayne County Land Bank had title to this property for less than 30 days. And through that process, we made this site eligible for all of the brownfield incentives that a core community would have access to. And it made the difference in the financing. This was an extremely complicated site with underground tunnels full of asbestos. It reminds me of your hospital site, only even more complicated than that. And so this site actually, you know, unfortunately, it started in the economic downturn and it sat idle for a few years. But in recent years, a lot of commercial has been developed and this project is finally coming to fruition. Island Lakes of Taylor is an interesting site. I was the vice president of acquisition for the Brownfield Development Company that I noted earlier, and I would scour the country for sites that would make good commercial and retail multifamily redevelopment opportunities. And I found a 100-acre site in Taylor that was a stormwater retention basin. And I talked to the engineer, in-house engineer, about reconfiguring that site and freeing up some acreage for development. We were able to create 70 acres of developable property on this city-owned site, and the city came in with a bond for the brownfield eligible costs, which made this site possible. And now it's fully occupied with commercial and industrial at the front end and residential in the back of the site. Site that I worked on in Las Vegas at the time, right around the crash, it was the largest land deal in the country. Almost 100 acres of land, 85 acres of land. When we tied up the property, the price per acre ranged between 1 and 5 million. We were able to expand the gaming district in Las Vegas to include this site, and the land prices shot up between 8 and 10 million an acre. Our financing package was massive. We had $200 million sales tax anticipated revenue bond package that it's a statute we do not have here in Michigan to finance an arena. We had plans for a 22,000 seat arena as well as a massive development right when the crash hit. And the project was completely restructured and reworked during the crash, but it was one of the largest incentive packages in the country's history. I added the Traverse City State Hospital just as an example of where we have worked with municipalities to make a project possible. That Grand Traverse County Brownfield Authority was established as part of the process to develop this site. I was actually the attorney on this deal, and it was back in 2001. So it's been quite some time. These are just other smaller projects in Lansing and Southfield where there were some very creative uses of the Brownfield Tax Increment Financing Program under Michigan law in order to create mixed-use developments. The Southfield site was a former mobile home site, and it required an intense amount of project management to get that site ready for redevelopment and work with the landowner. But ended up in a successful mixed-use development. So we wanted to walk through one of our proposed projects closer to home. We have a project in Munising that we are in the pre-development stage for. We're very excited about it. The project includes the redevelopment of a large portion of the main city block at Elm and Munising Avenue. And it has 2 phases. One is the construction of a 3-story mixed-use building with ground floor commercial and retail and 38 residential units above. And the second phase is the restoration of the Munising Fire Hall, which is a 100-year-old beautiful Art Deco building that is the prize of historic preservationists across the country, including Rob McKay at the SHPO office at the state level. So our plan is to take very good care of that building historically and preserve it. It will be occupied by one of Michigan's largest brewing companies and a national nonprofit. The project also includes a workforce development initiative that Shannon's going to explain in a few minutes. And our overall timing is to start closing on phases of the project next year in the 3rd quarter. Shannon's going to touch a little bit on the background.
And, this is where we wanted to dig in on how we really focus on community-centric type of development. During my work with the team at the Grandview Marquette, I had taken a trip to Munising and met with the city staff there. As you guys are probably aware, they have very specific challenges because of their hospitality and tourism-based dynamic. What Munising has seen over the last 5 years is a complete trajectory and an increase in tourism. In fact, I believe they hit the million visitors this summer by late July. Because they have such specific seasonal type of economic development, programming has been really difficult. And the other challenging factor Munising has had is they have not seen any new development in housing in about 20 years, have not received any type of allocations from the state agency, simply don't meet any of the dynamics to bring the tools in to get any type of scalable development across the table. Their populations and focus on housing are very course specific. Certainly there's not the market rate to be able to pencil developments without using economic tools. So we're looking at, a specific driven workforce model here to help bring in more housing, help the local community and fill these type of units. As Jill said, we're looking at 38 units of workforce housing. We're having conversations with local corporations like the National Park Service to do specific housing set-asides to fill that. But what we're also tying in is every aspect that you see in this development. We hear some of the initiatives from the LEO standpoint about, how do we really connect housing with economic development, with workforce and job training? And I think that we're able to really be able to program to meet all of these initiatives. First and foremost, we're in phase 1, acquiring, looking at the physical development side and the very complicated pieces of putting the capital stacks together that are very, very comprehensive. But we're working on a workforce training piece with all the Upper Peninsula agencies to actually have a physical on-site location for what we would call almost a training accelerator that will have one master tenant, a state-led agency that will bring in multiple workforce pieces and will be connected directly. As a developer, we're putting an affirmative marketing plan together with our retail tenants coming in for direct hiring, but we're also bringing in the local DDA and Pictured Rock Boat Cruises, John Madigan, some of the local business owners to also take place in kind of this direct training center. So what we're really excited about is from programming that we're going to have this initiative that will be embedded into the broader community. We're going to have access for people to come in, get instrumental training, have places to live that meet affordability. And I'll turn it over to Jill. She can kind of walk you through our capital stack within that workforce component, and have affirmative marketing and training options, not only in our development portion of the deal, but in the retail components from hiring. So I'll turn it back to you, Jill.
Let me go back a slide. As I said before, the project is 2 phases, and we did that strategically because of financing. We are looking at utilizing new market tax credits for the 3-story new construction. We really wanted to push for a LIHTC deal in Munising. There's need for both. There's need for market rate residential, but there's also a need for deep affordability. I mean, you really can't go wrong there with whatever units you produce, as long as you're not planning for, short-term rentals and VRBO. So, we went down the LIHTC road for a long time and then realized that we needed some flexibility in the residential because there is such a huge demand for workforce housing. And if we went the LIHTC route, we wouldn't be able to allow employers to take blocks of 2 or 3 units for workforce. And we really wanted this to be about a workforce solution because that really was what we heard from the community. So phase 1 is slated as a new market tax credit financed project, and 30% of the units will be at or below 80% area median income. The rest of the units will be market rate, but for Munising, that's lower than Marquette's average market rate. And then, as Shannon said, in the ground floor of that 3-story building will be a physical workforce development center that multiple agencies can provide direct service delivery for workforce development, so placement, and also dealing with local employers on hiring, as well as training. And then in phase 2, as we said, we have a large brewery coming in that will activate the public space that's in front of that fire hall and really create a connection between the main intersection and the next block past the next street right there, which is activated with retail and restaurants. But there was this big void in the downtown area, and we hope to fill it. That piece, that phase 2 piece, is another complicated capital stack with historic tax credits, opportunity fund investment. Shannon and I manage an opportunity fund with partners, and commercial debt, as well as an ask that's currently into the MEDC for CRP related funding. There are brownfield funds mixed in between both phases of the project. The fire hall, as you guys I'm sure have already guessed, is a brownfield site. There's a leaking underground storage tank on the adjacent property, and we have a site assessment grant that's already been dedicated to the property, so we'll be utilizing that in the project. And this is a slide, Shannon's going to go through some of these pieces that we've talked about in different presentations, just so that communities can kind of get inside our brain. So Shannon, you want to walk through some of these?
Well, you know, what we want to do is encourage you as you're having these conversations to think out, outside the box and missing middle. While Marquette is fairly dense, there's tremendous amount of opportunities to implement missing middle designs creatively, and also start to think about how you socially program that to be inclusive. What does it mean to your community, right? Your needs are very different than your neighboring communities or communities even downstate. Things that we look for and wanting to attract developers, you guys absolutely have everything, which is a great thing, is your downtown amenities. What's your architecture? What type of programming really fits into your community? Obviously, accessibility to transportation, bike amenities, parks, recreation, all the things we know that really encourage walkability and great livable standards. Downtown satellite for campus and the opportunity to bring in anchor institutions as partners. As a developer, when we come in, we look at really comprehensive, as Jill said, transformational projects. So, you know, the more that we can put together collaborative teams, you know, working together from programming, and the work that we do is very, very difficult. And those partners can often bring those projects across the table. So, you know, things that you guys need to look for when you're expanding your footprint is, you know, bringing in Northern, bringing in other anchor institutions, the opportunity for your private sector to participate in missing middle or even attainable housing. There could be financial benefits for them to be participating in those projects. Certainly, opportunity zone investments can bring additional equity, but same thing, do you have big real estate owners who are selling and willing to reinvest in your communities? Those are oftentimes missed in these type of projects that are being done. You know, and just going back into strategic partnerships, are you having ongoing conversation and taking place in that type of programming, even if it's privately owned? Like your hospital, like your mine site, the opportunity to be able to do thoughtful placement and programming, especially in a community like Marquette, there's no limit to that. And being able to leverage the type of partnerships to folks that really go beyond what your typical, you know, planning and ad hoc committees are just going to bring even more tools to the table. So we encourage you to, you know, work with your local banks, your CRA lenders, your anchor institutions, and expand your footprint on being able to deliver these type of developments.
I think that brings us to the end. And we'd love to, you know, entertain questions and discussion.
Yeah, thank you both so much, Shannon and Jill. That was a wealth of information, and I think, you know, I'm definitely gonna have to go back and watch this a couple times to get all of the meat out of that presentation. So thank you so much. I think that'll be really helpful as we're preparing our presentation. We are running a little behind, but we can make like 5 minutes for questions if people do have a couple questions they'd like to ask Shannon or Jill.
I do appreciate the presentation, so thank you very much. It's I think at the end, towards the end, it's very well aligned with, I think, some of that momentum that's already here in Marquette. Specifically, I think one group that we look towards, I think both maybe from a community standpoint, but also maybe from the developer side, is the artist community. I think the artist community here, if you look at our 3rd Street corridor, if you look at segments of downtown, if you look at the projects going on, there is that need for housing. And I think that would probably be something that I would like to get your thoughts on how that is viable when you have, you know, such large costs for material. You know, we talk about live work scenarios, rehabbing buildings isn't cheap. How do you, just specifically with artists, how do you see that happening, you know, around other towns in the UP?
Well, and the first thing I want to say, and I know Shannon has a strong opinion on this, you know, and I think, Evan, you said it when we started this, there is missing middle housing choice, and there's housing affordability. And those are 2 different things. And just because you're creating smaller units doesn't necessarily mean that those housing units are going to be naturally affordable. Costs of construction are rising exponentially. Materials are a major issue. And so, you know, most of the projects we do are layered with incentives. So I just want to kind of start off the answer to this question with kind of that point. And Shannon, I know you probably want to jump into this piece.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna answer that in 2 parts. First is, you know, number one, embracing the artist community always lends to bringing in additional character and other economic opportunities within the community. And I think, you know, at another time, we can provide you with several examples of amazing projects. In fact, there's one in Detroit right now that's happening. And that's really about understanding the dynamics and feasibility of your artist community and who that is. We're seeing a lot of co-housing choices. With access to space, whether it's maker space or artist space, once again, putting those together. So there's a lot of great examples about programming that we could go through. But number 2, I think that leads into a broader conversation that maybe a different conversation for you guys to explore, which is really understanding financial incentives. Incentives oftentimes are very misunderstood. If you look, incentives and tax credits have existed for over 100 years. And going back to Fannie Freddie, our federal government has invested in incentives and programming, which obviously came out originally from the Republicans. So better understanding how to program communities and sites to use, as Jill said, new market tax credits, to use 9% in a way that aren't like institutional housing, is a conversation that I would encourage the group to look to and to better understand, because these type of projects are comprehensive. Obviously, they're, in order to get them done correctly, be focused on design and just really entitlement. It's about being able to deliver a project and bring the right tools in to get those type of resources. And that can be an entirely separate conversation. So I push back on being able to explore what type of incentives are needed to get inclusive, equitable development and attainable development complete.
I would say that in the artist community side, there are some unique strategic partners out there, funding partners. We did an artist live workspace in Dearborn, Michigan, in partnership with Art Place. unfortunately, you guys are, you're not an entitlement community, so you don't have direct access to home funds. That was a tool that we used in that project. So really relying on, potentially nonprofit partners and other opportunities for funding, it will be difficult. I don't think there's a golden egg out there for you guys. But that's one place I would look. Group.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. And I kind of wanted to ask about incentives. So, I think that you both did a really good job of covering that. And I think that it's absolutely right that that's going to be probably an entirely separate meeting where we'll have to really dig into that. So in the future, perhaps sometime this spring. So thank you for touching on a lot of that in this presentation. I think it's a good introduction for a lot of us.
Well, I think the most important thing is to identify your priorities. Once you know what you want to focus on, whether it's missing middle, artist communities, things like that, there's a lot of ways to tweak the tools that you do have in order to meet those priorities, including TIF, including the Brownfield TIF program.
Well, and don't limit yourself to, once those objectives are put in place, the type of incremental development you can see from other neighborhood type of groups as well.
Sure. No, thank you. I think, with that, I just want to thank both of you once again for presenting to us today and providing us with some of your expertise and with some of the case studies that you provided, which I think are really relevant to the old hospital property specifically, and also many other properties in the community. I want to now just, take an opportunity to briefly introduce Lynn Swadley. I think many of us probably know Mr. Swadley. He's a big local developer here. He's built a lot of housing in Marquette at various price points, various kinds of housing. So, and I really wanted to get a local developer perspective from Lynn, somebody who really understands the ins and outs of the Marquette housing market. And just, Lynn, if you want to tell us what some of your experiences and challenges have been as a developer in Marquette, I'm sure we'd be really interested, and if folks can stick around, we'll have a little Q&A with Lynn as well, as we've had with these first two sets of presenters. Oh, Lynn, I think you're still muted.
Zoom ethics, etiquette. Good morning. It's nice to see that Munising is getting some interesting mixed use projects with the developer's presentation there. I assume that is a private developer making that happen with public sector support with tax credit pursuits and such to make that happen. Marquette is, it's a unique community. It's the economic hub of the Upper Peninsula, as we all know. Very challenging as a professional developer and builder over the last 10 years to, as we've seen, the incessant increase in the cost of housing in all its forms. It's been very frustrating for us as professionals, because we know that the bottom line is the numbers have to work for people. I think one of the developers said that affordability, is, low-income housing and housing affordability are kind of two different things. Affordability means something different to every family. What can you afford and what's in the market is out there that balances what you can afford. You can get financed, and a location and all the things that you're looking for your family's next move. That is very, very challenging. I know that saw some figures just yesterday that the average cost of a new home in the United States in the last year has gone up between 5 and 7%. The increasing high cost, I can tell you that trend is going to go on indefinitely. A good part of it is beyond any local community or local builder or subcontractor or supplier's control. Your average new home, a new home to be built, let's talk about single family residential, It pertains to all, quite honestly, whether you're multifamily or mixed use, but you've got materials, land, labor, and indirect cost. And there is nothing anybody in Marquette can do about the rising cost of commodities. I think materials are somewhere around 40–45% of the plus cost of a home. Electrical contractor Marquette has no control of the cost of copper, for instance. So I would suggest to you that the dynamics of that is going to be with us a long time. These challenges are going to be with us a long time. We're the only subdivision developer for residential in Marquette, have been for many years, essentially. Land cost has continued to creep up. It is, fortunately, we're not in an area where it is skyrocketed, somewhat stable, and available developable land. So where can you make a difference? I'd say land potentially and indirect costs. What are indirect costs? Regulatory, finance, engineering, marketing, these kinds of costs. The average home takes about 15 separate companies of subcontractors and builders to achieve the end result. The average home in Marquette right now, or the Marquette area, I like to think of as an area, not just the city limits. We're all intertwined as one community. The average new home is going probably in the mid 400s to 500s, depending, and without land. I know these least expensive home that we can provide with an average lot, which is in the mid 60s, is in the low 400s today. And nice home, but has a real challenge competing with the existing home market. And it probably always will. I really think the challenges are out there is for everyone, the public and the public sector. You've got to look at whatever you can control. You have to look at that and see what can be part of the solution. And if it's a city government or engineering firm, you've got to look at the little details, because it all adds up and makes a difference. There's no one big silver bullet to address this. I'm really glad to hear the term workforce housing starting to be used. We've been using this in the Home Builder Association of Michigan for a number of years, because that's really the challenge for communities. You've got to be able to have a housing stock for the average person that works in your community that can afford to live there. And that's one of the things for that new industry absolutely is high priority on their list when they're looking for investment in a community. Can that community provide workforce housing options for our employees if we choose to make the investment in that community? One thing I did say that the Munising project, I think I just caught the last half of that, but most of these projects require private developers, private equity has to be attracted to make a project happen. Tax credit incentive is what fuels the equity investment when you can't get market rate. That's the reality of housing in the United States, and has been for a number of years. Fortunately, there's some great programs out there that can be tapped in, although they tend to be highly competitive on a state level. So those are some of the challenges. We don't have the answers. We do our best. You may have 15 different companies involved in producing a home or a multifamily project in Marquette, plus suppliers, plus hundreds of suppliers, I might add. And every one of those 15 companies is faced with the same challenges, rising costs, rising labor costs, trying to retain people. We have skilled workforce shortages that are chronic in the state and the country, and rising labor costs accordingly. It's only natural. So every one of those 15 companies is challenged in a competitive market to provide the best price and product they can, and that balance is probably what we as professionals deal with every day. Cost, value, trying to make that right balance to put forth something that can be sold or contracted with to build. that's probably the highlights of the challenges, I would think.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective, Lynn. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Swadley here right off the bat?
I guess I have a couple of questions, maybe for even Jill and Lynn. How do you really think these low interest rates are affecting price? I mean, they've never been so low. I mean, you can get a 30-year mortgage for 2.5%.
That helps.
I feel that it drives prices up.
You maintain that it drives prices up?
I do. I feel that it's driving the prices up.
Well, financing cost is, that's one line item on a project's pro forma. If you think about it, if you're the developer, if you're the consumer, low interest rates, yes, it's absolutely easy. You can probably afford a little bit more. I don't know if I connect the dots like that, but
well, I guess somebody can afford to buy more, so they're thinking their house is worth more. You look at a $250,000 home now at 2.5% or 3%, and you go back 10 years ago and it was at 8%. It almost can theoretically double the value of that house.
Well, people obviously stretch farther when they know that the payments. It's all about the monthly payments, quite honestly, to the consumer, whether it's a home or a car. And so that is a valid point you're making. I think Stephanie could probably weigh in on this, but I think the average existing home across the country has increased about 4% nationwide from a year ago. So, there's definitely that going on. And that probably relates to demand in markets as much as anything. I looked at your minutes, and Evan, and when I got the packet, and it's interesting. You guys are really getting a wide, diverse conversation going with a lot of different aspects of this, and it's pretty refreshing. And and I hope you come up with some recommended measures that can be part of a solution. I know we're working on that at a state level at the Home Builders Association of Michigan. We've been on the front lines of that for quite a few years, and we hope to be releasing some more guidance here in the next year on specific solutions communities can take that can add to the ones that we've presented just a few years ago statewide. I will tell you on a local point, I think the PUD is one of the best tools for cities, and especially Marquette, to increase density with certain projects. Marquette, with the exception of a little bit of land to the south, is pretty much infill properties for developers to look at. And the city has to be ready to respond positively to any developer, because it does take the private sector to bring private equity to make a project happen. And the numbers have to work, and there's got to be a return. And often that return is a combination of all these factors, including tax incentives and et cetera. There's the devil's in the details. And I do think the PUD will give the communities flexibility because they're going to be challenged in the future with infill sites. I think I mentioned this the last time we were on a meeting together, that one of the things that happens around metro areas is that smaller fee simple zero lot lines are becoming quite prevalent over the last 10-15 years in townhouses, so people can buy townhouses without being part of a condominium association. It's very difficult to develop a condominium association when you only have like 8, 10, 12 potential housing units. It's hard for them to support the cost of a shared ownership. That's why fee simple zero lot lines, you see in large communities around the country, I've seen 16-foot wide properties, 20-foot wide properties and attached housing. the building codes are very helpful with that. As Mark well knows, townhouses are a line item in the specific category in the International Residential Code. It's the national code. That's one area that I think the city can be ready to be flexible if they see projects come forward that you might challenge them with what minimum lot widths and things like that. Again, City of Marquette's, the developable sites, in my opinion, are infill sites that are, each one's got their unique challenges.
Lynn, I'll jump in real quick. Thanks for being here and thanks for your insight. One of the recurring themes that we've discussed throughout maybe the last 3 meetings is the permitting process and costs of permitting. In your experience here as a developer, how have you seen that transpire over the last course of the 10 years? You talked about indirect costs specifically. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the permitting process.
Well, permits and fees, all right. You know, every community in Michigan's starved for income and fees. We understand that's a common challenge out there. You can only raise property taxes because the Headley Amendment only so much. People feel like they're taxed to the max already. Fees are a source of income and permits. There's got to be some tie-in for actual cost, and you can't have an arbitrary process to just assign fees. It should come as a result of some studies of, most communities have done cost of doing business type studies. I think in Marquette County, every year building permits go up. I don't feel like it is on residential, it is a deterrent. On commercial, they can be pretty good size. Zoning, single family zoning permit fees aren't so much, but here's the challenge. If you have a multifamily project, because let's be honest, the missing middle, workforce housing, what that looks like mostly, guys, is multifamily today in the United States, other than rural areas. Okay, in metro areas, some of the national home builders are producing homes in the upper 2s and 300s. In metro areas with national purchasing powers, that's not the reality for 80% of builders and developers in the country. All right, that's never going to happen in a little community with just you know, Marquette County has less than 100 single family permits a year now. So where is it going with this? It's the cost of everything to comply that adds up. You know, zoning fee may look fairly minimal, but the cost of compliance is getting crazy. You have to hire engineers to produce such detailed plans for city staff to do evaluations. Even on little projects, they can cost several thousands of dollars, and you know, and they all have good intentions, but you have to look at this as kind of death by 1,000 cuts, as they say. The permit itself may seem reasonable, but what did it take to bring all the compliance in to achieve that permit? And that's something that I think every community should look at pretty closely. You know, what is the actual cost of compliance? And still, how do we achieve the balance of what we want in our communities with the vision that communities and their leaders used with, you know, formulating the ordinances? That's probably your biggest challenge in cost, is what does it cost that developer to actually comply to get that seemingly reasonable permit fee? I spent $8,000 on a storage building, a commercial storage building, to get for a zoning and building permit that cost, I don't know, $1,500 combined. Give you an example. Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective, Lynn. Something that wouldn't be immediately obvious to anybody that's not in development.
Somebody that wants to have a building on 3rd Street to do a mixed use, good Lord, the cost of compliance for what they have to do to produce the drawings that are required under the land development code. You know, it's not just Marquette. Some of the more sophisticated townships have got their own versions. So, but you know, that's the missing formula that I think people lose sight of. And, you know, and I'm not necessarily picking on our city officials. I think Dennis is on here. But that is an extreme cost in a large project.
And I think we've been lucky that Mark has brought that up before too. So it's something we've heard and it's nice to hear again.
Yeah, it's nice to hear again for sure, and to have that confirmed. And I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So if we have one more question, if anybody has one more question, perhaps somebody that hasn't asked one for this round yet, Stephanie?
Landon, your dream list of what the city could do differently, what would be on it?
Wow, I may have to get back with you. It might be a paragraph.
We will take a paragraph at a later date.
I'll forward your paragraph to the committee, Lynn. You can email me.
Yeah.
Jackie, were you thinking the same thing?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the point of the committee is to provide actionable recommendations to the commission. So I'm just wondering what some of those what people would recommend that we can actually recommend to the city commission. My thought was specifically toward the hospital, because I think I think we can all agree that's a big area of opportunity, but it's going to be a massive amount of work. And I'm just wondering what the city could do specifically to help kind of move that forward and get a developer in here to make that middle income housing.
I'll answer that. I mean, I think that, the first thing is start to position that for brownfield. I mean, the major kind of stop there is that you've got a massive brownfield site. You've got to look at, the phases of development, starting to have dialogue where you could be more engaged, because I know it's privately owned right now. And right now, by the way, is the absolute perfect time to do it, because there is a slew of new brownfield incentives that are coming in actually next year. It's about repositioning it from a state, and look at other examples like Traverse City Hospital, like Mason Run and Monroe, some of those initiatives where the city was more actively engaged in doing a master plan on that site. You can do a master plan site specific. And then bringing in the resources and tools from the state, whether it's getting, your land bank, Eagle, or any of the other initiatives engaged for programming. Because I believe I was looking at, somewhere that's a 15 million plus brownfield. Does that need to be phased? Do you need to do your first due diligence and getting, that in and getting the due diligence done? But that's where I'd start. And I don't know if there's any dollars that are set aside for planning activities, so you can start to bring in those incentives. But timing is perfect. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, another reason to run property through the land bank is to reset the taxable value. So, to Lynn's point, communities are starving for revenue. So the use of incentives is always an analysis, against the revenue that the municipality is bringing in. So, the first step is to really list everything that you can do. You can run it through the land bank, reset that taxable value down to zero because it's privately owned right now. You already have access to core community on the brownfield side, so that's a major incentive. But also, thinking about your revolving fund and all those other resources, because to Lynn's point, you can either reduce the cost of construction or development by reducing fees or finding other ways to reduce costs, or you can bring creative sources to the table on this side. But those are the two ways that the municipality can really participate in making deals like this happen.
It's a good point. One thing that I thought of something for you, Stephanie. I would suggest that the city of Marquette look at all their available land that they have. All of it. Are there obscure lots somewhere that they can put out on the market that at lowest possible to spur single family workforce housing? And what do they need for utilities? Are they set up for services? Are they set up for utilities? Almost very few projects work with the developer providing all the equity. There might be opportunities for some of the land to the south that with the right partnership, public and private, that main utilities, water, sewer, can be upgraded as a result to running the required service mains to these properties. That's the kind of analysis that can be done on existing city infill property that the city owns. I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen something like that. I'm very familiar with the lands to the south in the old Heartwood, but there's probably some odd spots here and there that the city or other government agencies around that could be put into the mix as to kind of get it sort of ready. You still need a developer to bring money and an idea, so that, you know, to even make any of these things happen. But these communities there's stuff they can do to be ready, you know. And you have to have obviously a business friendly attitude, but you know, there's a few things I think you could be ready if they looked in just seeing what's out there, you know. And at the same time, I also want to say, in the private sector, we are constantly looking at different, better products, cheaper ways of doing things that still perform better. There's all kinds of technology out there with underground materials, vertical materials that can, you know, all can make a difference. It's a cumulative effect of all these little things that have to come into play to combat this death by 1,000 cuts that we got going on with affordability.
Yeah, thank you all for your input on that, and thanks for asking that question, Jackie. And I think that as we comb back through, you know, the presentations today and the comments, that there will be a lot of other little nuggets and gems that we can, and connections we can make with the hospital property specifically. But I do think that you make a good point there, Lynn and Jill, about like let's start now. You know, if you stay ready, you don't got to get ready. So I think that's the attitude we should have with that property for certain. With that, I do want to thank you, Lynn, for being here, and thank you, Shannon and Jill, for sticking around, because that was really helpful to have you here to pitch in on some of these questions as well. We really appreciate all of your help and your expertise and your insight. And, you know, we'll definitely be incorporating all of your feedback into our reports to the commission. So thanks again. Thanks to the committee members for being here and staying late a little bit. And we'll look forward to our January meeting. Over the next month, we'll be putting together a draft initial report to the commission and get that out to you guys in time for you to review it, so we can have a discussion, maybe make some amendments at our next meeting. And then by January 15th, half of our task will be done. We'll have our first of 2 reports submitted to the commission. So thanks for all your work, and I think we're going to continue to make a lot of great progress in the coming year.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Evan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a nice day now.
Bye.